The Colorado River system provides water to 40 million people across the West, from Denver to LA to Mexico. But after more than 2 decades of drought, water levels have reached historic lows, and competition for the remaining water between countries, between states, even between neighbors is growing fierce. Brooke Silva Braga traveled to one Arizona community that could lose access to the Colorado within weeks.
Drive just north of Scottsdale and you'll find a loose grid of dirt roads known as the Rio Verde foothills. 2,000 homes enjoying rustic desert beauty and the freedom of living outside the city limits. But Rio Verde now finds itself at the center of the West's growing water crisis.
I never thought I would actually be in a position where this community, it could crumble.
John Hornewer moved here 23 years ago, discovered his new community didn't have water service, and stumbled onto a new career.
The wells in my area are questionable at best, so I just opted to grab a trailer and haul my own water.
And then did someone say, hey, could you grab some for me?
Exactly. As my neighbors saw me coming up the road with the trailer, they're like, hey, did you stop and drop off a load for me?
Once every 4 to 6 weeks, tops off my tank.
More than a quarter of Rio Verde relies on hauled water.
And the tank actually runs from here to over here.
Karen Nabity bought here in 2014.
Yeah, we had talked to a lot of the neighbors, and they've been doing it for 50 years. And it wasn't a big deal. We weren't concerned about it at that time.
But times have changed as the Colorado River system has dried up. The pipe where Hornewer gets water belongs to the city of Scottsdale. And after years of warning Rio Verde they should find another source, in 6 weeks, on January 1st, Scottsdale is cutting off water to Rio Verde.
I expected to live out here for the rest of my life, and now I actually question whether here is going to be there the rest of my life.
Hornewer can make a 2-hour round trip to another source, but it's so far away, state law might not allow it. A regional water utility says it has a solution, but needs at least 2 years before it will be ready. So maybe Scottsdale will just keep the pipe open? Here's Scottsdale Mayor David Ortega.
Why not just let those few people keep the water for a little longer?
They should manage their own destiny with their own water. Right now, they are trucking water, burning diesel to supply themselves, which we do not support.
They're about to burn more diesel because they're going to have to truck it from farther away.
That's their problem.
Scottsdale has its own problem. The northern part of the city gets 90% of its water from the shrinking Colorado.
The constant decline of the water source is reality.
Yeah.
We have to adapt, and then we have to adapt more, and we have to adapt more.
To understand what faces the West, consider some basic math. By law, 7 states and Mexico are allocated in total 16.5 million acre-feet of Colorado River water each year. But these days, only about 11 million acre-feet are actually flowing. And so the big collection points of the river, Lake Mead and Lake Powell, are draining like bathtubs.
If you look out 2 years, Lake Powell could go so low that it's essentially dry.
Tom Bishatsky runs Arizona's water department.
What that would mean if we hit that is no water in the river through the Grand Canyon.
For starters, he says, temporary drastic cuts are needed to stabilize the system. But even then, the reduced flow of the river is unlikely to change.
It's still snowing and raining 80, 90, 100% of what it did historically. But instead of that turning into water that goes into the river, the water's disappearing.
Wait, what does that mean? Where is it going?
We're getting 40 or 60% of that water going into the river.
So at 90% of the snowfall, 40% of the water.
And so it's happening because the soil is much drier because it's been hotter. The snow is melting sooner, and trees and other vegetation are growing earlier in the year because of the warming climate. And it's probably the single biggest challenge that we have in managing the river moving into the future.
But the water is not coming back.
It is highly unlikely.
This summer, the federal government asked the states to sort out a deal to cut out as much as a quarter of their use. The states couldn't agree. The water rights have a legal pecking order, and California, which uses the most, has the right to take its cuts last. Meanwhile, Arizona has built infrastructure to store extra water underground and has banked a few years' worth. So why would they take voluntary cuts when they could just be banking more for the future?
And so it really complicates the ability to do something collaboratively.
On the one hand, situation's not good. On the other hand, the politics of truly addressing it are just real hard.
Yes, they are. That's a good summary of all of it.
Consider the politics of water pricing, a fraction of a cent per gallon even in the desert, yet rate increases face major opposition. Or the politics of construction in Rio Verde. Even lots with no water are still guaranteed building permits by the pro-growth state government. And consider the politics of lawns in Scottsdale. Even though most residential water is used outside the home, the same city cutting the tap to neighboring Rio Verde hasn't issued any watering restrictions on itself. But none of that would solve the problem. Not even cutting off all water to every home in Arizona would solve the problem, because 70% of the state's water is used for farming.
Farmers want to be here, and they're going to do everything they possibly can to hang on and stay here.
But the politics of cutting water to farmers like Nancy Kaywood aren't easy either. In many cases, they have the oldest water rights in the region and have already been taking cuts.
We don't want to start depending on other countries for our food and fiber.
Even understanding that, it does seem like there might be another part of the country where it'd be easier and maybe even more sensible to grow crops.
Go try to plant your lettuce, cabbage, cauliflower, all those winter crops in Minnesota. Nobody's going to get salads, you know?
This all takes us back to the tangled politics of Rio Verde. According to Maricopa County Supervisor Thomas Galvin, a temporary solution has been found. The utility company EPCOR could send water through Scottsdale's system for Rio Verde's use. The catch is Scottsdale needs to agree.
We just hope that Mayor Ortega can help these folks in a spirit of cooperation now that the solution has been found to facilitate it.
I am not equivocating. That's not going to happen. They'll add another 1,000 homes out there. They'll think, well, Scottsdale has got to be compassionate and give us the... That's not good enough. They're going to have to find their own solution.
Is there any solution that doesn't involve Scottsdale letting you use their standpipe?
At the moment, no.
So, 6 more weeks of water for 500 American homes, with more being built even as the pipe runs dry.
Do you anticipate there being other communities like that facing this in the years ahead?
Based on the pioneer attitude that still exists in Arizona, it's going to continue to happen.
For CBS Saturday Morning, Brooke Silva Braga, just outside Scottsdale, Arizona.
Tonight, a water crisis in Arizona as thousands of residents are about to be left without water. The water war hitting those in the Rio Verde foothills, a small but fast-growing area just west of Scottsdale. 2 weeks ago, the city of Scottsdale stopped the transportation of water, making good on a year's worth of warnings that the municipal water supply was running dry. About 500 homes, including some mid-construction, now counting down the days until their water runs out.
Because our livelihood.
It's now. We need water now. We can't wait.
Last week, Rio Verde residents taking their fight from the steps of City Hall to the first meeting of the year for the Scottsdale City Council.
It is not too late to do the right thing. Within a matter of days, our water tanks at our homes will be dry. But this is avoidable. We just need Scottsdale to process that water.
Scottsdale had been warning residents that the supply of water brought in by tankers could be cut off, noting developers of Rio Verde bypassed a state law, which on the books would have required them to prove a guaranteed supply of water for the next 100 years. But the supply of water in the greater area continues to drop. A decades-long drought, depleted groundwater sources, and reservoirs at record lows, leaving Rio Verde foothills an unincorporated town without its own supply of water, high and dry. Rio Verde residents filed the lawsuit against Scottsdale last week, saying the city violates state law and must resume providing domestic water services to the town. Now, only days away from being left out to dry, residents are doing what they can to conserve the little water they have left.
I just cannot believe that a group of people would look at their neighbors and say, we're going to slowly kill off your community.
All right, Vaughn Hillier joins us now in studio. So, Vaughn, we know that the municipal water supply is cut. Is the city doing anything to help these families?
Right. That's where now the city and these residents are looking outside of Scottsdale. But that is where the hard truths about the costs of water come in. All of this ultimately factors into the cost of the water for these residents. You're talking about these tanks, these water tankers, having to drive even further out to other cities. And that adds cost because of the transportation to bring it back. And it's not just about this particular community, but it's also about the future ones. You know, you're talking about housing demand in the Phoenix area right now, and a new project just broke ground 3 months ago to build 100,000 new homes. Well, the governor just released a report just this week saying that there's an inadequate water supply over the decades ahead to sustain that future development. So it's not just about the future, but it's about the current residents here of Arizona and whether there is water to truly sustain the greater Phoenix area.
Yeah, well, I want to go back to something in your report, and you're from Arizona. It's one of the reasons why I wanted you to do the story. I don't know if this is normal, but how did that development even get built if they weren't sure there was going to be enough water?
Right. They bypassed a state law that is on the book saying that you have to prove that you have a 100-year water supply. And the developers of that new project that I'm talking about, they also proved it. But what they're coming to realize is that the reservoirs, as they continue to go down, groundwater continues to be depleted, largely because of the demand from agriculture, is that the water that they thought is available is not there going forward into the future. And so that is where there's talks about moratorium on building into the future, but also should there be farming in the greater Phoenix area? You're talking about more than 50% of water going to agriculture here. When you're looking at the landscape, it's just tough to try to sustain a city there in the middle of the Sonoran Desert.
Is this a problem that you remember growing up with, or is this something new?
This has become urgently more of concern. Growing up, we always heard about water.
Yeah.
Turn off the faucet right after you finish washing your hands. When you're brushing your teeth, turn off the water there. But now you're talking about literally residents not being able to flush their toilets. This is something that I never experienced with, and we were thinking it would be decades away. We're talking about this all happening right now.